Hello and welcome back to Between the Hashes, our weekly college football primer. Coming to you from Los Angeles, California, my name is Matt Keim. I'll be your host today. And today we will be talking about one of just 3 AP 1 versus 2 matchups in the past decade. Now, you'll notice that the rankings at the top at the header say 1 versus 3. I'm going to be using the college football playoff rankings from here on out, so 1 versus 3. But in the AP, it's 1 versus 2. This is an exceptionally hard game to pick for a lot of different reasons, in that these two teams, Tennessee and Georgia, are very evenly matched. You have the number 1 total offense in Tennessee going against the number 2 total offense in Georgia. You have the 9th ranked rush defense versus going against the 4th overall total defense. The odd man out is Tennessee's pass defense, but we'll get to that in a minute. And you have a quarterback who's leading the Heisman race with Hendon Hooker, and then you have another who has just gotten better every single year in Stetson Bennett. You have nightmare matchups with Brock Bowers. You have nightmare matchups with Tennessee's entire receiving core. And so this is a very, very hard game to pick. So let's look at Tennessee, how Tennessee got here. Tennessee was not expected to be this. They got their start by facing an overtime game on the road against Pittsburgh. They beat Florida at home in a very highly anticipated game, and it was their first time beating Florida in a few years. And then for the first time in 15 years, they beat Alabama. A nail-biter at home with a knuckleball of a last-second field goal. They gave an encore to that by completely demolishing what was a very highly thought-of Kentucky team, mainly by intercepting a quarterback, Will Levis, who has some real NFL hype to him, intercepting him multiple times and just straight-up demolishing them. En route that they have the number 1 overall offense, they are averaging 7.4 yards per play. Hendon Hooker is now responsible for 26 touchdowns, 4 on the ground, 22 in the air, and has only thrown 1 interception. Take a lot of aggressive shots downfield, and they take care of the ball. Now, one thing to remember about Tennessee's offense is that they run at a ratio of about 4-3 run to pass, and so their offense is still definitely predicated on being able to run the ball, which in turn sets up the downfield passing scheme that second-year coach Josh Heupel loves. Now, Tennessee gets a bit of a boon on offense with Cedric Tillman coming back. Apparently, he'll be completely unlimited. He was expected to be one of the best receivers on their team and probably one of the best in the country. He's been dealing with nagging injuries all season. He came back against Kentucky in a very, very limited sense. He should be ready to go full-time in this game. The cause for concern with Tennessee is their pass defense is still ranked dead last even after what they did to Kentucky. 127th pass defense, which contrasts pretty heavily with a top 10 rushing defense. It evens out to about 80th total defense, giving it up about 5.2 yards per play, and so it's just not good enough. They're getting a lot of comparisons to that 2019 LSU team. They were never this bad on defense. They had their issues, and it was around this time of year that they started to put it together, but that team had a lot more NFL ready talent than I think this Tennessee team does. It's going to be a bit of an uphill climb from that side of the ball. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's focus on tomorrow's opponent, Georgia. So how did Georgia get here? After losing 15 guys to the NFL draft, Georgia got here by immediately demolishing Oregon and then kind of sleepwalking through other pieces of their schedule. They kind of let Kent State hang around. They were behind for a large portion of the game against Missouri. Both of those games were influenced heavily by turnovers, which is something that is a huge cause of concern for Georgia. But despite all that, they still have a top 5 ranked defense in every statistical category. They're 4th overall. They're 4th against the rush. And their offense is nearly as good. It's not as explosive as what you're going to see from Tennessee. It's a lot more methodical, a lot longer drives, but they have a tight end in Brock Bowers that almost nobody can stop, and he'll be a huge matchup disadvantage. And they still have lots of pieces from last year, McConkey, Bowers, and Stetson Bennett. Now, Stetson Bennett has already thrown almost as many pass attempts as he did in the entirety of last year. Now, granted, he didn't play every single game last year. He was not the day 1 starter. JT Daniels was, but even said that he only has 20 less pass attempts in the 8 games so far than he did in about 13 last year. He has a higher completion percentage. He has about the same touchdown to interception ratio, but again, and he has rushed for 5 touchdowns. So he's responsible for about 14 touchdowns, but he's been playing really, really well. And even in fact, in early September, he was getting Heisman hype. He's nowhere near that now, but he's been solid and more than what they needed him to be. They're averaging 7.2 yards per play. It kind of shows just how dead even these teams are, kind of in a lot of different ways, especially on offense. They just get to the end zone in very different ways. One really, really big cause for concern for Georgia is the recent injury to Nolan Smith, one of their best, if not their best defensive player outside of Jalen Carter. He has a torn pectoral muscle and is out for the rest of the season. He was their leader in sacks with 3. And the reason this is concerning is that Georgia only has 10 sacks on the year, so getting after the quarterback has not been a strong suit of this team. And against a guy like Hooker, one thing you're going to want to do is get after the quarterback. That said, there is one other advantage for Georgia, and this is why I think I'm going to lean Georgia here, is that the game is in Athens. They have not lost in Athens since the South Carolina game in 2019. If anybody could do it, I very much see a world where Tennessee pulls this out and wins this game. But Georgia's kind of one of those teams where it's like, even though they've struggled at points during the season, I'm leaning with Georgia because until someone beats them, it's hard to argue against them. So my official prediction is Georgia wins, but Tennessee covers, because I think a line that is 2 scores, I think the line as of the time of this recording is -8, is a little generous in favor of Georgia. Okay, lightning round. There's other interesting games this week, and I want to talk to you about them. Alabama, coming off of a bye, goes to Death Valley to take on the LSU Tigers. Brian Kelly's first matchup against the Tide, and I think Bryce Young and company are going to be a little too much for LSU to handle. Texas at Kansas State, I have no idea here. I think Kansas State is a little bit more consistent, especially given how seamlessly their backup quarterback Howard has fit into that offense. So regardless of whether or not Howard or Martinez plays, I think Kansas State takes this game at home. Clemson goes to South Bend to play against Notre Dame. This is a game that's interesting because Clemson is only favored by 3.5. Like Alabama, Clemson is definitely not what they have been in years past. I just don't know that Notre Dame's the team to take advantage of it, despite the fact that Notre Dame has rebounded after a rough first month of the season. And Wake Forest at NC State. Wake Forest at NC State. This game should have been a quarterback duel between Devin O'Leary and Sam Hartman. Unfortunately, Devin O'Leary is out for the year, and despite the fact that backups played nicely in a come-from-behind win over Virginia Tech, I don't trust that offense at all for NC State, so I think Wake Forest takes this one. Which brings us to our underrated game of the week. Maryland versus Wisconsin. Yes, I am talking about Maryland football in November. So Wisconsin is favored at home by 5, and Wisconsin is coming off of a stretch in which they have fired their longtime coach, Paul Chryst. The man they replaced him with is their former defensive coordinator, Jim Leonard, someone who is kind of rumored to be a head coach in waiting for that job. And so the rest of the season is rumored to be kind of an audition. In the last month since Paul Chryst was fired, Wisconsin has gone 2-1, with the one loss being an overtime loss to a Michigan State team that is just in complete disarray currently. On the other side of the field, we have a Maryland team that has had some strong moments. Their only losses have come to a solid Purdue team and, well, to Michigan. That has been backed up by a familiar name, Tualia Tagovailoa, Tua's younger brother, has been turning in some solid performances as Maryland quarterback under Coach Mike Locksley. Tagovailoa got hurt a couple of weeks ago, but is expected to be back fully in this game against Wisconsin. So one of the reasons why this game interests me so much is that it's a complete matchup of opposites. So listen to this. Maryland has the 28th ranked total offense, led by Tagovailoa, and I'm sure some of that number being even a little bit lower than it is influenced by his injury. But the 71st ranked defense. It's the complete opposite for Wisconsin. So Wisconsin has the 33rd total defense and the 72nd ranked offense. So it's almost dead even for the opposites. So who do I like here? Ordinarily, I'd go Wisconsin at home just because of Maryland's history. But with how Tagovailoa and Maryland has just kind of looked, I think they pull out a minor upset here. So I'm going with the Terrapins here. Anyways, thanks for watching. Remember to give us a like, comment, subscribe, and remember to tune in for the John Keim Report for continuing updates on the Washington Commanders as this wild season of theirs progresses. And remember that hockey season is now open, so follow All's Caps, hosted by former Capitals defenseman Carl Alsner and AP hockey writer Steve Wino on Empire Media, that's AMPIRE Media on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks, guys, and enjoy the games.